Please make me your slave forever, human. The words hang in the air, electrifying the tense atmosphere of the bombed-out city square on Bolus Prime. United Earth Federation soldier Richard Harris stares in disbelief at Tara, the captivating Bolian female who utters this unexpected plea. The prisoner exchange, a delicate operation overseen by stern UEF officials and suspicious Bolian leaders, grinds to a halt. Richard's mind races. The long-standing Earth-Bolian conflict has seen countless battles, but never a moment like this. Tara's eyes, alien yet expressive, lock onto his. She speaks again, her voice low and urgent. I have crucial intelligence about Bolian military operations. Grant me asylum, and I'll share everything. The Bolian delegation bristles. Their leader, a towering figure with mottled blue skin, steps forward. Return her immediately. This exchange will proceed as agreed. Richard hesitates, weighing the potential of Tara's offer against the fragile peace of the prisoner exchange. His hand instinctively tightens on his pulse rifle. Around them, the ruins of the city loom like silent witnesses to years of destructive warfare. In a split-second decision, Richard declares, I claim her as a prisoner of war under Article 17 of the Intergalactic Conventions. The words tumble out, fueled by adrenaline and the sudden realization of the strategic importance of Tara's intelligence. Outrage erupts from the Bolian side. Angry shouts fill the square, echoing off crumbling buildings. This is a violation. We'll resume hostilities immediately. Tension crackles in the air like static electricity. UEF soldiers raise their weapons, mirrored by the Bolian guards. The situation teeters on the brink of violence. Colonel Sarah Blackwood, Richard's commanding officer, steps in. Her voice cuts through the chaos with military precision. Stand down, all of you. We'll accept the Bolian female into provisional custody for debriefing and intelligence verification. The Bolian leader's face contorts with barely contained rage. You risk severe diplomatic consequences, Colonel. This act will not go unanswered. Blackwood meets his gaze coolly. Noted. We'll proceed with the rest of the exchange as planned. As the situation defuses, Richard receives new orders. Harris, escort the Bolian to our secure facility for questioning. Keep her under close watch. Richard nods, acutely aware of Tara's presence beside him. He feels the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, along with something else, a growing attraction he can't quite explain. As they prepare to depart, neither Richard nor Tara notice the subtle exchange of glances among certain UEF personnel. Bolian spies, deeply embedded within human ranks, begin to formulate plans. Their mission, recapture Tara and eliminate the soldier who dared to claim her. Richard guides Tara towards the waiting transport, his mind whirling with questions. What intelligence does she possess? Why is she willing to betray her people? And how will this impromptu alliance reshape the future of human-Bolian relations? As they board the transport, the bombed-out city square fades behind them. Ahead lies an uncertain future, fraught with danger and intrigue. Richard and Tara's journey is just beginning, and its ripples will soon be felt across the galaxy. The transport's engines hummed to life as Richard guided Tara aboard. The bombed-out city square receded behind them, a stark reminder of the conflict they were leaving behind. As they settled into their seats, Richard's mind raced with questions about the enigmatic Bolian who had upended the prisoner exchange. We'll be at the UEF facility in about an hour, Richard said, his voice low. You mentioned intelligence about Bolian military operations. Care to elaborate? Tara's alien features softened, her mottled blue skin catching the transport's dim lighting. I was an intelligence officer, she began, her words careful and measured, but I couldn't stand by and watch my government's oppression any longer. As the transport cut through the atmosphere, Tara shared details of Bolian military installations and troop movements. Richard listened intently, realizing the immense value of the information she provided. The journey passed quickly, filled with hushed conversations and stolen glances. Upon arrival at the UEF base, they were immediately separated. Colonel Blackwood herself escorted Tara to a high-security debriefing room, while Richard found himself ushered into a stark interrogation chamber. Explain your actions, soldier, a stern-faced officer demanded. Do you realize the diplomatic shitstorm you've stirred up? Richard recounted the events in the city square, his decision to invoke Article 17, and the intelligence Tara had shared during their journey. As the questioning dragged on, he learned of the growing crisis his actions had sparked, with the Bolian government demanding Tara's immediate return. Hours passed before Richard was released from the interrogation. Exhausted, he made his way to the mess hall, his mind still reeling from the day's events. He had just sat down with a tray of unappetizing rations when alarms blared throughout the facility. "Attention all personnel," a voice crackled over the intercom. "Security breach in progress. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Richard's fatigue vanished instantly. He bolted from his seat, his meal forgotten. His first thought was of Tara. If there was a security breach, she would be a prime target. As he raced through the corridors, chaos erupted around him. UEF personnel scrambled to secure sensitive areas, while others sought to locate the source of the breach. Richard's combat instincts kicked in as he navigated the pandemonium, his eyes scanning for any sign of Bolian infiltrators. He rounded a corner and nearly collided with Tara, who was being hurriedly escorted by 2 UEF guards. Their eyes met, and Richard saw a mix of fear and relief in her alien gaze. "Harris!" one of the guards shouted. "We need to get her to a secure location. The Bolians are—" The guard's words were cut short as a blast of energy struck him squarely in the chest. Richard reacted instantly, pushing Tara to the ground as he drew his sidearm. The remaining guard returned fire, but another shot from their unseen assailants took him down. "This way," Richard hissed, pulling Tara to her feet. They sprinted down a side corridor, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Richard's mind raced as he led Tara through the labyrinthine base. The Bolian spies had to have inside help to breach the facility's defenses so thoroughly. He couldn't trust anyone within the UEF chain of command. As they paused to catch their breath in a dimly lit storage room, Richard made a decision. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The base is compromised. We need to get off-world." Tara nodded, her alien features set in commitment. "I trust you, Richard," she replied. "What's the plan?" Richard pulled out his communicator, hesitating for a moment before making the call. "Elena, it's Richard. I need your help. No questions asked." Captain Elena Rodriguez's voice crackled through the device. "Harris, what the hell is going on?" "No time to explain," Richard cut her off. "Can you get us to the auxiliary hangar without being detected?" There was a pause before Elena responded. "All right, but you owe me big time. Head to Sublevel C, Maintenance Shaft 7. I'll guide you from there." With Elena's help, Richard and Tara navigated through seldom-used maintenance corridors and air ducts. They emerged into the auxiliary hangar, where a small, unmarked spacecraft sat waiting. "She's fueled up and ready to go," Elena's voice came through Richard's communicator. "Good luck, Harris. You're going to need it." As alarms continued to blare throughout the base, Richard and Tara boarded the craft. Richard's hands flew over the controls, his military training kicking in as he initiated the launch sequence. The hangar doors parted, revealing the star-studded expanse of space. With a roar of engines, the small craft shot forward, leaving behind the chaos of the UEF base. As they accelerated away from the planet, Richard allowed himself a moment to breathe. He looked over at Tara, who sat in the co-pilot seat, her alien eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft in the quiet of the cockpit. Richard punched in coordinates for a remote planet on the fringes of UEF space. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "At least, I hope so." As the stars streaked by outside, Richard felt the weight of their situation settle upon him. They were now fugitives, hunted by both the Bolians and potentially the UEF. He glanced at Tara again, acutely aware of her presence beside him in the cramped cockpit. The tension between them was palpable, their shared ordeal in close proximity intensifying the attraction that had been building since their first encounter. As they hurtled through space towards an uncertain future, Richard realized that everything had changed. Their relationship, their lives, perhaps even the course of the conflict between humans and Bolians. With a final look at the receding planet behind them, Richard set the autopilot and settled in for the long journey ahead. Whatever challenges awaited them, he knew one thing for certain. He and Tara were in this together now, for better or worse. The stolen spacecraft emerged from hyperspace, its hull still bearing scorch marks from their hasty departure. Richard eased off the throttle as a massive structure came into view. Nexus Station, a sprawling spaceport teeming with life and shadowy opportunities. "There it is," Richard said, gesturing towards the viewport. "Our best chance at disappearing for a while." Tara leaned forward, her alien eyes widening at the sight. "It's enormous. How will we ever blend in?" "That's the beauty of it," Richard replied, deftly maneuvering their ship towards the docking bays. "Nexus is a melting pot of species and cultures. 2 more fugitives won't raise an eyebrow." As they approached, Richard activated a secure channel on the ship's comm system. "Time to call in some favors," he muttered, punching in a series of codes. Within moments, a gruff voice crackled through the speakers. "Harris, that you crazy bastard?" Richard grinned. "Sarge, I need your help. No questions asked." There was a pause before the voice responded. "Docking Bay 17. Be there in 10. True to his word, a grizzled human veteran was waiting for them as they disembarked. He handed Richard a small package without a word, then disappeared into the crowd. Inside their new quarters, a cramped but serviceable room in the station's lower levels, Richard opened the package. It contained 2 sets of identification chips and credit sticks. "These should keep us off the radar for now," he said, handing Tara her new identity. "Welcome to Nexus Station, Lyra Ven." Tara examined the chip, running her blue fingers over its surface. "And who are you now, Richard Harris?" "Call me Marcus Reed," he replied with a wry smile. "Freelance cargo pilot and definitely not a UEF soldier." As days turned into weeks, Richard and Tara settled into an uneasy routine. Their small living space forced a constant proximity that only intensified the tension between them. Every brush of skin, every shared glance carried unspoken weight. One evening, as they pored over station schematics, planning escape routes, Tara's hand accidentally grazed Richard's. The touch sent an electric current through them both. Their eyes met, and for a moment the universe seemed to hold its breath. Richard cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "We should, focus on the task at hand." Tara nodded, her alien features inscrutable. "Of course, professional boundaries." Their tenuous peace was shattered by an incoming transmission on Richard's secure communicator. Colonel Blackwood's face appeared, her expression grim. "Harris, your escape has caused quite the stir," she said without preamble. "Both UEF and Bolian forces are scouring the sector for you. Watch your backs." Richard's lips pursed. "Understood, Colonel. Any other intel?" Blackwood's eyes darted off-screen before she continued. "There's a Bolian task force headed towards the Nexus sector. ETA unknown. Stay alert." As the transmission ended, Richard turned to Tara. "We need an edge, something to keep us one step ahead." Their search for information led them to a dimly lit bar in Nexus Station's underbelly. There, amidst the haze of alien tobacco and the clinking of glasses, they met Zix. The reptilian information broker's forked tongue flicked out as he sized them up. "I hear you're in the market for some sensitive data." Richard leaned forward, his voice low. "What do you know about Bolian military movements?" Zix's multifaceted eyes glinted. "I know plenty. Question is, what's it worth to you?" The price Zix named was staggering. Richard's face fell, but Tara placed a hand on his arm. "We'll find a way," she said firmly. Zix chuckled, a raspy sound like scales scraping together. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. I have some tasks that need doing. Dangerous work, but lucrative." Richard and Tara exchanged glances. The risks were high, but the potential payoff was too great to ignore. "We're listening," Richard said. Their first mission came sooner than expected. A Bolian outpost on a nearby moon held classified documents that Zix's clients desperately wanted. Richard and Tara found themselves crouched behind a ridge, surveying the facility's defenses. "Security's tighter than we thought," Richard whispered, lowering his binoculars. "We'll need to improvise." Tara nodded, her alien features set with grit. "I'll create a distraction at the south entrance. You slip in through the maintenance hatch." The plan worked initially. Tara's expert knowledge of Bolian protocols allowed her to draw away a significant portion of the guards. Richard made it inside, downloading the classified files onto a data chip. But as he exited the facility, alarms blared. A squad of Bolian soldiers appeared, cutting off their escape route. "This way!" Tara shouted, grabbing Richard's hand and pulling him towards a narrow ravine. They ran, pulse blasts sizzling the air around them. Richard returned fire, his military training kicking in as he provided cover for their retreat. Suddenly, Tara stumbled, a cry of pain escaping her lips. Richard saw the scorch mark on her leg, where a blast had grazed her. Without hesitation, he scooped her up and sprinted the final distance to their hidden shuttle. As they lifted off, narrowly evading the Bolian pursuit crafts, Richard's heart raced with more than just adrenaline. Back in their quarters on Nexus Station, Richard tended to Tara's wound. His fingers moved gently over her alien skin, applying a healing salve. "Thank you," Tara murmured, her eyes locked on his. Richard looked up, their faces mere inches apart. The air crackled with tension. Slowly, inexorably, they leaned towards each other. Just as their lips were about to meet, Richard's communicator chirped urgently. They jumped apart, the moment shattered. Colonel Blackwood's voice came through, tense and hurried. "Harris, you need to move. Now. A Bolian strike force is en route to Nexus Station. They know you're there." Richard's blood ran cold. He met Tara's gaze, seeing his own willpower reflected in her alien eyes. "Time to run again," he said grimly. They grabbed their meager belongings and the precious data chip, racing towards the docking bay where their ship waited. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a squad of Bolian special forces. At their head stood Commander Vex, his blue skin darkened with rage. "Traitor," he spat at Tara. "Surrender now, and your death will be quick." Richard raised his weapon, positioning himself in front of Tara. "Not going to happen." The docking bay erupted into chaos. Pulse blasts flew in every direction as Richard and Tara fought their way towards their ship. They moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other's blind spots and taking down Bolian soldiers with practiced efficiency. Just as it seemed they might be overwhelmed, a new voice cut through the firefight. "Get to your ship!" Zix shouted, his reptilian form darting between crates as he laid down covering fire. Richard didn't hesitate. He grabbed Tara's hand and they sprinted the final distance to their spacecraft. As the engines roared to life, Zix's voice came through the comm system. "Data transferred. Consider our deal complete. Now go." The ship blasted out of the docking bay, barely avoiding the grasping tractor beams of the Bolian vessels. As they entered hyperspace, Richard allowed himself a moment to breathe. He turned to Tara, who was already poring over the stolen intelligence. "Where to now?" Tara looked up, her alien features softened by a mix of exhaustion and excitement. "There's a UEF outpost in the Omega sector. With this intel, we might be able to negotiate our safety and maybe even turn the tide of the war." Richard nodded, setting the coordinates. As the stars streaked by outside, he felt the weight of their situation settle upon him once more. He glanced at Tara, acutely aware of their undedication tension and the challenges that lay ahead. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain. Their journey was nowhere near the end. As the Nexus Hawk emerged from hyperspace, Richard eased back on the controls, revealing a vast asteroid field dotted with hidden outposts and clandestine mining operations. "There it is," he said, gesturing towards a particularly large asteroid. "UEF Outpost Omega 7. Tara leaned forward, her alien eyes scanning the rocky surface. "It looks unassuming." "That's the point," Richard replied, carefully maneuvering their ship through the asteroid belt. "Best place to hide is in plain sight." As they approached, a crackling voice came through the comm system. "Unidentified vessel, state your business." Richard took a deep breath before responding. "This is Marcus Reed, requesting permission to dock. We have urgent business with Captain Elena Rodriguez." There was a tense pause before the voice returned. "Proceed to Docking Bay 3. Security teams will meet you upon arrival." The Nexus Hawk touched down in a small, dimly lit hangar. As the airlock hissed open, Richard and Tara found themselves surrounded by armed UEF personnel, their weapons trained on the newcomers. From behind the security detail emerged a woman with short-cropped hair and a no-nonsense expression. "Stand down," she ordered, and the guards lowered their weapons. She turned to Richard, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "You always did know how to make an entrance, Harris." Richard stepped forward, relief washing over him. "Elena, it's good to see you." Captain Elena Rodriguez's eyes darted to Tara, then back to Richard. "I assume this is the reason for all the fuss? Come on, we need to talk, privately." Elena led them through a maze of corridors to a secure briefing room. Once inside, she activated a series of jamming devices before turning to face them. "All right, spill it. What the hell is going on?" Richard and Tara exchanged glances before launching into their tale. They recounted their escape from the UEF base, their time on Nexus station, and the dangerous mission that led to their acquisition of classified Bolian intelligence. As they spoke, Elena's expression grew increasingly grave. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, processing the information. "A bioweapon targeting human genetic markers? That's beyond anything we've encountered before." Tara nodded solemnly. "It's why they want me back so desperately. I worked on the project before I defected. I know its weaknesses, its potential countermeasures." Elena stood pacing the room. "This changes everything. We need to get this information to High Command immediately." She paused, looking at Richard. "You know what this means, don't you? You'll both be fugitives until we can sort this out." Richard met her gaze steadily. "We knew the risks when we decided to come here, but this is bigger than us now." Elena nodded, her decision made. "I'll set up a secure channel to Colonel Blackwood. In the meantime, you two need to lay low. I'll assign you quarters in the auxiliary section. It's isolated, should keep you out of sight." As they made their way to their temporary lodgings, Richard felt the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They had made it this far, but he knew the real challenges were just beginning. The auxiliary section was a stark contrast to the bustling main corridors of the outpost. Their quarters, while small, offered a measure of privacy they hadn't experienced since fleeing UEF space. As the door slid shut behind them, Richard and Tara found themselves alone for the first time in what felt like ages. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Tara broke the silence first. "Richard, she began, but was cut off by a sudden flickering of the lights. The room plunged into darkness for a moment before emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in a soft red glow. "Asteroid collision," Richard explained, moving to check the room's systems. "Happens sometimes out here. Should be back to normal soon." As he turned back, he found Tara standing much closer than before. In the dim red light, her alien features seemed softer, more vulnerable. Without thinking, Richard reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. Time seemed to stand still as they gazed at each other. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they came together. Their lips met in a kiss that was at once tender and urgent, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in a single moment. Just as Richard pulled Tara closer, deepening the kiss, a shrill alarm shattered the silence. They sprang apart, instincts honed by months on the run kicking in instantly. Elena's voice came through the intercom, tense and urgent. "Harris, we've got incoming. Bolian strike force led by Commander Vex. They found us." Richard's mind raced. "How? We were careful. Covered our tracks." "Questions later," Elena replied. "Right now, we need to move. Meet me in Hangar Bay 5. I've got a plan, but you're not going to like it." As they sprinted through the corridors, alarms blaring around them, Richard couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and exhilaration. Whatever Elena had in mind, he knew it would be risky. But with Tara by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. They burst into Hangar Bay 5, finding Elena already there, standing before a sleek, unfamiliar craft. "Meet the Nexus Hawk," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Our latest prototype. Stealth capabilities, experimental propulsion system. If anything can get you out of here, it's this." As Richard and Tara hurried to prep the ship, Elena coordinated the outpost defenses. The sounds of battle grew closer, the Bolian forces pressing their advantage. "We can't leave you here," Richard protested as they prepared for launch. Elena's face was grim but determined. "Someone has to cover your escape. Don't argue, Harris, just go. We'll rendezvous at the Beta 9 waypoint." With a final nod to his old friend, Richard sealed the Nexus Hawk's airlock. As the hangar doors opened, revealing the star-studded expanse of space, He felt Tara's hand on his shoulder. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Richard nodded, his hands flying over the controls. "Let's show these Bolians what this bird can do." The Nexus Hawk shot forward, its advanced systems allowing them to slip past the Bolian blockade undetected. As they accelerated away from the asteroid field, Richard allowed himself a moment of relief. They had escaped, but he knew their journey was nowhere near the end. Setting a course for the Gamma sector, Richard turned to Tara. Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of dedication and something deeper, more personal. "What now?" she asked softly. Richard took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Now, we find a way to stop this bioweapon, and maybe, just maybe, find a place for us in all this chaos." As the stars streaked by outside, Richard and Tara settled in for the long journey ahead. The Gamma sector awaited, a lawless frontier that held both danger and opportunity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the stars streaked by outside, Richard and Tara settled in for the long journey ahead. The Gamma sector awaited, a lawless frontier that held both danger and opportunity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their moment of peace was short-lived. As they entered the Gamma sector, alarms blared throughout the Nexus Hawk. Richard's hands flew over the controls, his face illuminated by the flashing red warning lights. "Massive Aean storm dead ahead," he reported, his voice tense. "We need to alter course." Tara leaned forward, studying the readouts. "No time. It's too large. We'll have to go through it." Richard nodded grimly, gripping the controls tighter. "Hold on tight. This is going to be rough." The Nexus Hawk plunged into the swirling maelstrom of charged particles. Lightning-like discharges crackled across the view screen, bathing the cockpit in an eerie, pulsating glow. The ship bucked and shuddered, straining against the electromagnetic onslaught. Suddenly, a series of alarms shrieked to life. Tara's fingers danced across her console, her expression growing increasingly worried. "Richard, our stealth systems are failing. The Aeon storm's interference is too strong." Before Richard could respond, a new threat appeared on their sensors. A massive ship was rapidly closing in on their position, its energy signature unlike anything they had encountered before. "Zerian," Tara breathed, her alien features tightening with concern. "We've entered Consortium territory." A deep, resonant voice boomed through their communication system. "Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Zylvex of the Zerian Consortium. You have illegally entered our space. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded." Richard's mind raced, searching for options. But with their stealth systems offline and the Zerian ship's superior technology, he knew they were outmatched. He met Tara's eyes, seeing his own resignation mirrored there. "We don't have a choice," he said softly. "We have to comply." As Richard powered down the Nexus Hawk systems, they felt the pull of a tractor beam. Their ship was drawn inexorably towards the massive Zerian carrier, dwarfing them like a whale might a minnow. The moment they touched down in the carrier's cavernous hangar, they were surrounded. Tall, lithe figures in sleek armor poured in from all sides, their weapons trained on the Nexus Hawk's airlock. As the door hissed open, Richard and Tara found themselves staring down the barrels of a dozen energy rifles. "Hands where we can see them," a Zerian soldier ordered. "Exit the vessel slowly." As they complied, Richard couldn't help but marvel at the advanced technology surrounding them. The Zerian hangar was a marvel of efficiency and design, with ships and equipment far beyond anything he had seen in UEF or Bolian space. Their wonder was short-lived. As soon as they stepped onto the hangar floor, they were swiftly and efficiently restrained. The Zerian soldiers moved with practiced precision, their actions betraying years of rigid training. "Take them to the brig," one of the soldiers commanded. "Captain Zylvex will want to interrogate them personally." As they were marched through the winding corridors of the Zerian ship, Richard's mind whirled with possibilities. He glanced at Tara, noting the tension in her alien features. He knew she was thinking the same thing. How were they going to get out of this one? Their journey ended in a stark clinical room. The walls seemed to shimmer with an odd, pearlescent quality that made Richard's eyes hurt if he looked at them too long. They were seated in chairs that seemed to mold to their bodies, uncomfortably secure. Moments later, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Captain Zilvex entered, his tall, willowy form radiating authority. His skin was a pale lavender, marked with intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and change as he moved. His eyes, large and entirely black, fixed on them with unnerving intensity. "A human and a Bolian," Zilvex said, his voice a low, melodious rumble. "An unusual pairing, especially given the current galactic climate. I find myself intrigued." He circled them slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You will explain your presence in Zephyrian space. Now." Richard and Tara exchanged glances. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They had come too far, risked too much to give up now. "Captain," Richard began, meeting Zilvex's unsettling gaze, "what we're about to tell you could change the course of the war, not just between humans and Bolians, but for the entire galaxy." Zilvex's expression remained impassive, but Richard sensed a flicker of interest. "Continue," the Zephyrian captain commanded. Over the next hour, Richard and Tara laid out their story. They spoke of the Bolian bioweapon, of Tara's defection, of their desperate flight across the stars. As they talked, Zilvex's expression grew increasingly grave. When they finished, silence hung heavy in the room. Zilvex paced, his long fingers steepled before him. Finally, he turned to face them. "If what you say is true," he said slowly, "then the balance of power in our sector could be irreparably shifted. The Consortium cannot allow this." Richard felt a glimmer of hope. "Then you'll help us?" Zilvex's lips curled into what might have been a smile. "Perhaps, but not without a price." He tapped a console on the wall, bringing up a holographic display of an asteroid field. "On the edge of our space lies a secret Bolian research facility. We believe they are developing weapons that could threaten even the Consortium. We want you to infiltrate it." Tara leaned forward, her eyes widening. "You want us to spy for you?" "Not just spy," Zilvex corrected. "Sabotage. Destroy their research. In exchange, we will grant you your freedom and consider lending our support against the Bolian bioweapon threat." Richard and Tara shared a look. It was dangerous, potentially suicidal, but it was also their best chance at stopping the bioweapon and securing powerful allies. "We'll do it," Richard said firmly. Zilvex nodded, satisfied. "Excellent. We begin your training immediately. Time is of the essence." As they were led from the interrogation room, Richard felt a mix of trepidation and excitement. They were about to embark on their most dangerous mission yet, but for the first time in months, he felt a real sense of hope. Beside him, Tara's hand found his, squeezing gently. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Together. As they followed their Zephyrian escorts through the ship's winding corridors, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into another trap. But with no other options, they pressed on. The next few days passed in a blur of intense training and preparation. The Zephyrians provided them with advanced stealth suits, weapons, and cutting-edge infiltration technology. Richard and Tara pushed themselves to the limit, absorbing every piece of information and honing their skills for the dangerous mission ahead. Finally, the day arrived. Captain Zilvex briefed them one last time in the hangar bay, his black eyes reflecting the dim light. "Remember, your primary objective is to gather intelligence and sabotage their research. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." Richard nodded, adjusting the unfamiliar weight of the Zephyrian stealth suit. "Understood, Captain." As they boarded the Nexus Hawk, Tara's hand found his. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "As I'll ever be," Richard replied, squeezing her hand before taking his place at the controls. The journey to the hidden Bolian research facility was tense, but uneventful. As they approached the asteroid field housing the complex, Richard activated their new cloaking technology. The Nexus Hawk slipped silently between the massive rocks, invisible to the facility's outer sensors. They docked in a rarely used maintenance airlock, the Zephyrian tech easily bypassing the security protocols. As they stepped into the facility, their suits automatically adjusted to match the surrounding environment, rendering them nearly invisible. Moving swiftly and silently through the corridors, Richard marveled at the effectiveness of their Zerian gear. They passed several Bolian guards without raising so much as a flicker of suspicion. As they delved deeper into the complex, signs of advanced weapons research became increasingly apparent. Laboratories filled with strange equipment and test chambers lined the halls. Richard's stomach churned as he imagined the destructive potential housed within these walls. They finally reached a heavily fortified section of the facility. A series of airlocks and security checkpoints guarded the entrance to what had to be the main research lab. Richard nodded to Tara, and they set to work, their fingers flying over holographic interfaces as they bypassed layer after layer of security. The final door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a cavernous laboratory. Bolian scientists in protective gear moved between workstations, their attention focused on glowing screens and complex apparatus. At the center of the room stood a sealed chamber, within which a swirling, opalescent substance pulsed with an otherworldly light. "The bioweapon," Tara whispered, her voice barely audible through their suit's comm system. They moved cautiously through the lab, their Zerian suits allowing them to blend seamlessly with the equipment. At an unoccupied terminal, Tara inserted the data chip Zylvex had provided. Information began streaming onto the device as Richard kept watch. Suddenly, Tara stiffened. "Richard," she hissed, "this is worse than we thought. The weapon doesn't just target humans. It's designed to be species-specific. They could wipe out entire races." Before Richard could respond, a shrill alarm pierced the air. Tara's eyes widened in horror as she realized she had triggered a proximity sensor. Within seconds, the lab erupted into chaos. "Move!" Richard shouted, grabbing Tara's arm and pulling her towards the exit. Bolian security forces poured into the lab, energy weapons blazing. They fought their way through the complex, their Zerian weapons proving devastatingly effective against the Bolian guards. Richard's training kicked in, his body moving almost on autopilot as he ducked, rolled, and returned fire. As they rounded a corner, Richard spotted a waste disposal chute. "There!" he yelled, gesturing to Tara. They dove into the chute just as a volley of energy blasts scorched the wall behind them. They emerged onto the asteroid's surface, the void of space yawning above them. Their suits automatically adjusted, providing oxygen and regulating temperature. Richard oriented himself quickly, spotting the Nexus hawk in the distance. As they sprinted towards their ship, a familiar voice rang out, "Stop right there, traitors!" Richard turned to see Commander Vex and a squad of elite Bolian troops emerging from a nearby airlock. Energy blasts erupted around them as they dove for cover behind a cluster of mineral deposits. The firefight was intense, both sides utilizing the asteroid's low gravity to perform impossible leaps and rolls. Richard's heart pounded as he returned fire, acutely aware of how exposed they were. A cry of pain from Tara sent a jolt of fear through him. He turned to see her clutching her side, her suit's fabric darkened with blood. Gritting his teeth, Richard laid down a barrage of covering fire, allowing Tara to scramble towards the ship. With a final burst of speed, they reached the Nexus hawk. Richard practically threw Tara into the airlock before diving in himself, energy blasts peppering the hull around them. Richard's hands flew over the controls as he initiated launch procedures. The ship roared to life, lifting off just as Vex and his troops reached the landing area. The Nexus hawk shot into the asteroid field, Bolian fighters in hot pursuit. What followed was a harrowing chase through the dense field. Richard pushed the ship to its limits, weaving between massive rocks and using the enhanced propulsion system to stay ahead of their pursuers. The Bolian ships were relentless, but less maneuverable in the tight spaces. Finally, they broke free of the asteroid field. Richard immediately activated their cloaking device, and the pursuing ships fell back, unable to track them. As the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, Richard turned his attention to Tara. She sat slumped in the co-pilot's seat, her breathing labored. He quickly set the ship on autopilot and moved to examine her wound. "It's not as bad as it looks," Tara said through gritted teeth, but Richard could see the pain in her eyes. As he tended to her injury, using the ship's medical kit, their eyes met. The intensity of the past few hours, the fear of loss, and the relief of survival all crashed over them at once. Without thinking, Richard leaned in, his lips meeting Tara's in a desperate, passionate kiss. When they finally broke apart, Tara gave him a weak smile. "We should get shot at more often," she quipped, wincing as she shifted in her seat. Richard chuckled, but his mirth was short-lived. The ship's computer chimed, indicating they had reached the rendezvous coordinates. But as he looked out the view screen, his heart sank. The vast expanse of space before them was empty. "Where are they?" Tara asked, her voice tense. Before Richard could respond, the comm system crackled to life. A coded message from Captain Zylvex appeared on the screen, explaining their forced relocation and providing coordinates to a secret Zephyrian outpost. As Richard plotted the new course, another alert caught his attention. His blood ran cold as he realized its implications. "We've got a problem," he said, turning to Tara. "They tagged us with a tracker. The Bolians are still on our tail." Tara's face hardened with dedication. "Then we better make this trip count. What's our fuel situation?" Richard checked the gauges, his frown deepening. "Not good. We'll be cutting it close, especially if we have to take any detours." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their situation settling over them. Finally, Tara spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "We have to make it, Richard. What I saw in that data, it's worse than we imagined. If the Bolians deploy this weapon, it won't just be humans at risk. Entire species could be wiped out." Richard nodded grimly, setting their course. As the Nexus Hawk accelerated towards their destination, he couldn't help but feel they were racing against more than just the Bolians. The fate of the stars might well rest on their success. Days passed as they navigated through unfamiliar space, constantly on alert for signs of pursuit. They avoided populated systems, knowing that recognition could lead to their capture. The journey was tense, each moment bringing new challenges and close calls. As they approached the outer edges of Zephyrian space, their sensors detected a massive nebula dead ahead. The swirling clouds of gas and dust could provide the perfect cover, but they also presented unknown dangers. Just as Richard was about to suggest they find a way around, the ship's alarms blared. Bolian warships had appeared on their long-range scanners, closing fast. "We don't have a choice," Tara said, her eyes fixed on the approaching nebula. "We have to risk it." Richard nodded, his hands tightening on the controls as he steered the Nexus Hawk towards the cosmic cloud. As they drew closer, their sensors began picking up strange energy readings from within the nebula. "What is that?" Richard muttered, studying the readouts. Tara leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm not sure, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before." As the nebula loomed before them, filling their view screen with swirling colors, Richard and Tara exchanged a look. Whatever lay within those cosmic depths, they would face it together. With the Bolian fleet closing in behind them and the mysterious energy signature pulsing ahead, they had no choice but to press forward into the unknown. Richard took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the controls. "Here goes nothing," he said, and plunged the Nexus Hawk into the heart of the nebula. Nebula. The Nexus Hawk shuddered as it entered the swirling cosmic cloud, the view screen awash with vibrant hues of purple, blue, and green. Richard's hands gripped the controls tightly, his eyes darting between the readouts and the chaotic vista before them. "Radiation levels are spiking," Tara warned, her fingers flying over the sensor controls. "The nebula's interfering with our systems." As if on cue, the ship's lights flickered and several alarms blared to life. Richard fought to keep the Nexus Hawk steady as it bucked and jolted in the turbulent gases. "Come on, girl," he muttered, coaxing the vessel deeper into the nebula's embrace. The Zephyrian upgrades proved their worth as the ship's system stabilized, adapting to the harsh environment. Tara's brow furrowed in concentration as she worked to maintain their stealth capabilities. "I think we're losing them," she said, a note of cautious optimism in her voice. Hours passed in tense silence as they navigated the treacherous cosmic soup. Electrical discharges danced across the hull, and more than once Richard had to execute a series of complex maneuvers to avoid pockets of intense radiation. Just as the strain was beginning to take its toll, the nebula's swirling gases began to thin. "We're approaching the edge," Tara announced, her voice tight with anticipation. The Nexus Hawk burst free of the nebula's grasp, emerging into a star system unlike any they had encountered before. A massive red giant dominated the sky, its bloated form casting an eerie crimson glow over everything. "Holy, Richard's exclamation trailed off as his eyes locked onto an enormous structure floating in space before them. It was a space station, but one of clearly alien design. Its sweeping, organic lines and shimmering, opalescent surface spoke of technology far beyond human or Bolian capabilities. Before either of them could react, the ship lurched violently. "We're caught in some kind of tractor beam," Tara reported, her fingers dancing over the controls to no avail. The Nexus Hawk was drawn inexorably towards the alien station, passing through a shimmering energy field and into a cavernous docking bay. As the ship settled onto the deck with a gentle thud, Richard and Tara exchanged a tense look. "I guess we're expected," Richard said, reaching for his weapon. Tara nodded, her own hand resting on her sidearm as they made their way to the airlock. The door hissed open, revealing a group of tall, ethereal beings waiting for them. Their bodies seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and their eyes held a depth of wisdom that made Richard feel like a child in comparison. One of the beings stepped forward, its movements fluid and graceful. "Welcome, Richard Chen and Tara Vashna," it said, its voice resonating in their minds rather than their ears. "I am Zara, leader of the Etherians. We have been expecting you." Richard's hand tightened on his weapon, but he didn't draw it. "You know who we are?" Zara's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "We have been observing the conflicts in your region of space for some time. Your arrival here was fortuitous." Tara stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "You've been watching us? How? Why?" "All will be explained," Zara assured them. "But first, we must discuss the reason for your journey. The bioweapon you seek to stop threatens more than just your species. It has the potential to upset the balance of power in ways even its creators do not fully understand." Richard and Tara exchanged a surprised glance. "You know about the weapon?" Richard asked. Zara nodded solemnly. "We possess technology capable of neutralizing this threat. However, our assistance comes at a price. You must prove yourselves worthy through a series of trials." "Trials?" Tara asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Tests of your physical abilities, mental acuity, and the strength of your bond," Zara explained. "Only by passing these trials can we be certain that our intervention will not lead to further conflict." Richard looked at Tara, seeing his own tenacity reflected in her eyes. They had come too far to turn back now. "We'll do it," he said firmly. Zara's expression remained impassive, but there was a hint of approval in their voice. "Very well, follow me." As they were led deeper into the station, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far bigger than their mission to stop the Bolians. The fate of entire civilizations might rest on their performance in these trials. He reached out, taking Tara's hand in his own. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The bond between them, forged in the crucible of their shared struggles, would be their greatest strength in the trials to come. The Etherian station stretched out before them, its alien corridors holding both promise and peril. As they followed Zara towards the first of their trials, Richard and Tara steeled themselves for the challenges ahead, knowing that the future of the galaxy might well depend on their success. As they emerged from the final trial, exhausted but triumphant, Zara's ethereal form materialized before them. "You have proven yourselves worthy," Zara intoned, her voice resonating with approval. "The Etherians will provide you with the means to neutralize the Bolian bioweapon and bring an end to this conflict." Over the next few days, Richard and Tara worked closely with the Etherian scientists, integrating their advanced technology into the Nexus Hawk. The ship's systems were enhanced beyond their wildest dreams, with a cutting-edge cloaking device and weapons capable of disabling even the most formidable vessels without causing catastrophic damage. As they prepared to depart, Zara approached them one final time. "Remember, your mission is not just to stop the weapon, but to pave the way for peace. Use our gifts wisely." With a nod of drive, Richard and Tara boarded the Nexus Hawk. As the ship glided out of the Etherian station, they set a course for the heart of Bolian space. Days later, they found themselves on the outskirts of a massive Bolian fleet. Richard's hands flew over the controls, activating the Etherian cloaking technology. The Nexus Hawk shimmered and vanished from sight, becoming invisible to the enemy's sensors. "It's working," Tara whispered, her eyes fixed on the readouts. "They can't see us." Richard guided the ship through the Boolean formation with precision, weaving between massive warships until they reached their target, the imposing flagship commanded by Commander Vex. "Ready weapons," Richard said, his voice steady despite the tension coursing through him. Tara's fingers danced across the weapons console, targeting key systems on the Boolean flagship. "Targeting engines and weapon systems. Ready on your mark." Richard took a deep breath, then nodded. "Fire!" The Nexus Hawk unleashed a barrage of precisely targeted energy pulses. They struck the flagship with surgical accuracy, disabling its engines and weapon systems without causing a catastrophic breach. Alarms blared across the Boolean fleet as their command ship suddenly went dark. Confusion spread through their ranks, ships breaking formation as they tried to identify the unseen attacker. In the midst of the chaos, a massive holographic image flickered to life, projected from the distant Aetherian station. Zara's serene face looked down upon the assembled fleets, her voice echoing through space. "People of Earth and Bolia," she began, "I am Zara of the Aetherians. We have observed your conflict and can no longer stand idle. The bioweapon you seek to deploy has been neutralized. It is time to end this war and forge a new path of peace." The revelation sent shockwaves through the Boolean fleet. On the flagship's bridge, Commander Vex stared at the holographic image in disbelief, his carefully laid plans crumbling around him. Taking advantage of the confusion, Richard and Tara used the Aetherian teleportation technology to board the Boolean flagship. They materialized on the bridge, weapons at the ready, facing a stunned Commander Vex and his officers. "It's over, Vex," Tara said, her voice firm as she confronted her former superior. "The bioweapon is useless. You've been lying to your own people about this war from the beginning." Vex's face contorted with rage. "You dare betray your own kind, Vashana? For what? These humans?" "For the truth," Tara replied, her gaze unwavering. "For a chance at real peace, not the false security you promised through genocide." As Tara spoke, laying bare the extent of the Boolean government's deception, Richard noticed a shift in the room. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances, their determination visibly wavering. Vex's second-in-command, a tall Boolean named Krev, stepped forward. "Commander, if what they're saying is true, if the Aetherians can truly neutralize our weapon, perhaps it's time to consider alternatives." "Alternatives?" Vex spat. "There are no alternatives. We finish this now or—" His words were cut short as Krev moved with surprising speed, disarming the commander and pinning him against the console. "No, sir. We're done following your orders blindly. I'm calling for a ceasefire." As Krev took control, issuing orders to stand down, Richard and Tara shared a look of cautious hope. The first step towards peace had been taken, but the real challenges of reconciliation still lay ahead. In the distance, they could see a UEF ship approaching, no doubt carrying representatives ready to begin negotiations. Richard took Tara's hand, squeezing it gently. Whatever came next, they would face it together, ready to help forge a new future for both their peoples.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.